I'm sad to report that the brain-to-brain communications that I've received the past couple days have been from, I believe, Rule 13 and Zach Knight impersonating Brent Spiner. I received an email from Brent Spiner, and he said, "My dearest Gail, we are nearing Earth. I can finally see our sun in the distance, so I know we are getting close. Thankfully, I have my laptop with me, or I wouldn't be able to communicate with you all at all from here. I need to explain what happened now that we're finally safe. The Jesuits were continuing their open fire on our location. Not a second after I sent my last email to you, a massive explosion rocked the church, and I immediately felt myself being yanked through the air down the corridor. My flailing arms managed to snag a pylon for my body to cling to. I held my laptop in my teeth, refusing to let it go. I then looked behind me to see that the torpedoes had ripped a clean hole straight through our hole. With our shields down, we couldn't close it. To my horror, Matthew McConaughey and Jim Carrey, who had been only yards away from me when the hole was breached, had been sucked right out into space. I'd like to say, you may wonder, how could Brent write so articulately when he was so injured? Terrence Jenkins just talked to me on Skype, and we believe it's because they have really, Vladimir Putin's a great medic, and Gerard Butler's an MD, and he was also on this ship, and he was able to give a lot of assistance to the men. But it took a lot for Brent to write this. It wasn't easy for him. He's a highly intelligent man. To my horror, Matthew McConaughey and Jim Carrey, who had been only yards away from me when the hole was breached, had been sucked right out into space. I cried out their names. Hugh Jackman was in the same position as I, holding himself tightly against a railing a little further down the corridor. He too saw the plight of our men outside the church, their helpless bodies drifting away into the cold bleakness of space. That was when Hugh whipped out a rope. He tied one end to his waist and the other to the railing, then launched himself after the two men. I turned my hopeful gaze to watch him through the window. Hugh tread his arms forward like he was swimming through an ocean, gritting his teeth as his blood began to boil in the vacuum of space. Hugh Jackman is used to his blood boiling, so he was able to push through it, but Matthew McConaughey wasn't faring nearly so well. The vacuum was causing his body to swell like a balloon. Hugh swam faster and harder, and until finally he was able to grab Matthew by the leg. His free arm stretched to swipe. I'm kind of correcting a little bit of grammatical errors in here. To swipe Jim Carrey, but accidentally knocked him so hard he merely sent the man's body spinning in circles. "All righty then," Jim Carrey shouted, his body twirling endlessly through space until it disappeared. We lost Jim Carrey. From what we understand, he has died, and Jesus doesn't plan to bring him back. A tiny manly tear bubbled up from Hugh Jackman's eye and floated off into space, shimmering like a distant star. Unable to rescue Jim, Hugh had no choice but to turn back. Not far behind them, the Jesuit warship loomed. Moments later, there was a loud liquid burst and another explosion, causing the pylon I was holding to rattle and shake. The Jesuit warship had set off a massive new cocky. My head ached, and I realized our brain-to-brain servers had been knocked offline from the radiation. You may say, well, what happened with your prayer to Jesus to rescue these men? Terrence Jenkins just talked to me on Skype, and he said that Jesus did show up. And this was after the torpedoes started. And he showed up and reassured my men that this was all part of his plan and that everything was going to be all right. And then he left. And he allowed Jim Carrey to die. And I asked Terrence, I says, why do you think Jesus just left? And he said apparently he doesn't want to, he's afraid that Satan is, that if he intervenes, then Satan's going to intervene. And so he's trying to back off and just let things go, I guess, according to his plan. See, every time Jesus shows up, Satan shows up. So, and it is not correct. The person, my brain-to-brain communicator for the past couple days has not been Brent Spiner. It's either been Zach Knight or Rule 13 impersonating Brent Spiner to my brain. Let me tell you, they put up a really good impersonation. It sounded just like Brent. I don't know what they did, if they took past conversations of Brent and somehow put them into my mind, but they really fooled me. Anyways, Hugh had no choice but to turn back. Not far behind them, the Jesuit warship loomed. And everything I'm reading happened over the course of several days. Moments later, there was a loud liquid burst and another explosion. So the Jesuit warship had set off a massive nukkake. My head ached, and I realized our brain-to-brain servers had been knocked offline. I was in anguish. How would I reach my love, my precious Gail, to tell her if anything happened to me? The next thing I knew, the corridor was being invaded with blobs of floating semen, and I was shaking my head, trying to keep the globules away from my face. By the time Hugh and Matthew got back to the ship, Matthew's body was so swollen it couldn't fit through the hole again. Hugh landed himself on the deck, returning his grip to the railing he had tied himself to with a heavy grunt. Hugh strained, pulled, and lodged Matthew into the hole behind him, plugging up the deck. I felt myself crash to the floor as the atmosphere on the deck stabilized. That was when Vladimir came running down the corridor, shouting to see if we were all right. I could see that he was drenched in semen, and he was holding his eye. He had like a hand over his eye. All three of us nodded and told him we were okay. We have to get out of here, I told Vladimir, but Vladimir shook his head. He was holding his eye because he was getting an infection in his eye from the nukkake. We had much larger issues at stake than our church being destroyed. He pointed with his free hand to the Jesuit warship out the window. This warship, he said, was part of a massive project. In fact, his intelligence team had known about this for quite some time. Look at the top of that warship and tell me what it looks like, Vladimir said. I gazed out the window and opened my mouth in shock. Is that, I began to ask, and Vladimir solemnly nodded. It was like the handheld version, only longer, girthier, more solid than steel, and the Jesuits had installed it on the very crest of their warship. There it was right in front of my eyes, the orgasmic telefornication ray. Vladimir went on to elaborate, confirming what we all instantly knew. Like the handheld version, the weapon was designed to make a target insanely, uncontrollably aroused. This gigantic megaton version affixed to the top of this warship was going to be used to target not just one, but masses of people on Earth, and they were planning to unleash their first experiment on Florida. If they did this, my dear, you would have been caught in the middle of the chaos. Everyone around you would have been raping each other, but most especially you. People would be climbing into your windows, snatching people up, trying to rape you. I wanted to send a message for everyone to hide their kids and hide their wives, because they would be raping everybody out there. But with a weapon this powerful, there would have been nowhere to hide. They would be banging on your doors until they ripped it open, climbing through the air vents, and if you had been in your car at the time, they would have stacked their bodies all over your car, raping anything they could get a hold of. The potential of this super weapon could not be understated. I got to admit, this sounds hard to believe, and that's why when I first read this email, I thought it was from an imposter. But Terrance has assured me that the Jesuits do have this technology. Let me tell you how they stopped this. Vladimir Putin went on a suicide mission. And what he did is Hugh Jackman and Vladimir gathered up all the injured men, and they ran down the corridor to find the others, and they didn't get very far. Hugh slipped on some semen, and he knocked Brent and him down to the floor, and it was a big mess. Their hands and shoes squeaked against the slippery floor as we tried to right ourselves. Hugh was able to steady himself first. With one hand on the wall, he reached down with the other to grab my hand, but in my clumsiness, I only dragged him back into the ground, into the semen in my body. About 45 minutes later, we were able to gradually inch towards the end of the corridor. Vladimir, concerned and still holding his eyes, asked if we were going to be okay. Hugh waved to him affirmatively. We then continued on our way, and Vladimir hurried quickly to the bridge. I was gathering up men where they had been blown about the corridors, many of them unconscious. That was when I suddenly felt the ship moving underneath us, and I decided to look out the window to see where we were headed. We were growing close. What Vladimir did is he crashed Church of Gail into the Jesuit warship and caused the warship to explode to stop the telefornication ray from hitting Earth. So the Jesuit warship exploded and took out all the Jesuit warships in the Jesuit space fleet. So we destroyed all of the Jesuit space fleet. But in the process of doing that, they damaged Church of Gail. This was like a suicide mission. So Brent and Vladimir were heroes. In fact, we were getting so close, I knew something must be wrong. And I shouted for Vladimir, wondering what was going on. The tip of our tower was headed straight into the port orifice of the Jesuit warship. I braced for impact. I heard the explosion as the church crushed through the opposing ship. I thought for sure this had been a suicide mission, and I prayed. Jesuits are attacking my throat. Just then, the warp engines engaged, and the battered decks rattled and shook as we took off into deep space. I was able to steady myself enough to look out the window again. In the distance, the Jesuit warship was in pieces, breaking apart into space like a giant breadcrumb. My initial cheers turned into screams as the sound of the ship blasting apart was followed by a massive shock wave headed straight toward our church. I swear it was just inches from my face at the window, tailing just behind us at warp speed. Increased speed, Vladimir, I thought. You might think, how could Brent write so articulately when he's so damaged? He's got an MD degree, he's very smart, and he's also a very strong man. You have to increase speed. In just moments, our warp speed jumped a little higher, then a little higher, and I smiled as the shockwave shriveled behind us. We had beat it. We had beat them in that awful Jesuit warship. Our success lasted only about 30 minutes. After that, we had lost all power again, and our church had ground to a dead halt. After some time, Vladimir made his way down to my position and explained our situation. Our engines were overheating so severely the ship was raring to explode. He had tried taking the engines offline, but it was no use. Upon further inspection, he discovered that they'd caught on fire when the two ships had collided, when they collided into the Jesuit warship. We were running out of time. We were going to have to abandon ship. Vladimir and Brent Spiner gathered all the men to the escape pods, and they made sure that every man went in there first before they did. And they were risking their life. So Vladimir and Brent Spiner were heroes and deserve a Medal of Honor for what they did. All of the men on my marriage list were on this spaceship, including a Walmart manager that I work with. And I said, but Terrence, I saw that Walmart manager at my job. Terrence said that was an automaton that they created. These automatons look just like a real person. They're very convincing. It's amazing the technology we have today. Vladimir, so they gathered all the men into the escape pods, 2 men per pod. Matthew McConaughey had to be stuffed into his own for sure. Vladimir and Brent took the last one, and it was just in time. In other words, they risked their lives to make sure that all the men got in they were like escape pods. And then Vladimir and Matthew and Brent took the last one, and it was just in time. Almost as soon as their escape pod launched from the docking port, they watched the last remnants of the church blast apart in a massive, colorful explosion. So Brent was writing to me from the escape pod. They're traveling at a gruelingly slow sub-light speed. That's about 3/4 of the speed of light, I think. And so they're not going to land on Earth till probably sometime. This is about 2 o'clock in the morning Eastern Standard Time on, I believe it's June the 1st. Yeah, June the 1st. So they're going to land sometime. We need help from NASA to help these people land safely, okay? These Jesuits fooled everybody. These Jesuits fooled everybody. From what I got, this brain-to-brain communicator to my brain was telling me that Jesus was dropping off movies at gabriellechana Fox News Channel and the Walmart movie studio about some so-called trial in the middle of outer space. Terrence Jenkins says there was no trial going on in the middle of outer space. So apparently these updates to the Jesus Gail movie that were being dropped off at Walmart movie studio and Fox News gabriellechana news station were Jesuit movies made to trick us. And they have not started the defamation trial against the Jesuits for Crazy Gail Wiki yet. So, and I said I was having thrilling brain-to-brain loving with Brent. That was Rule 13. They found out that it was Rule 13 making love to me with a dildo, brain to brain. Let me tell you, she was really convincing. I thought it was Brent Spiner. So, because I was worried. I thought, oh no, you mean Zach Knight's been making love to me? That's Brent Spiner? And so I'm not going to be making any brain-to-brain love until I'm sure that this brain-to-brain... Apparently, when they shoot Nukakis, when the Jesuits shoot Nukakis in the air, they're able to throw off the brain-to-brain communications. And that's what they did. And then Zach Knight and Rule 13 came in and started impersonating Brent Spiner to me. So, Gabriellechana, Fox News Channel, you need to know... Terrance Jenkins tried to call the presidents all over the world, and none of them were answering their phone. They're all asleep. They believe what I believed, that there was a trial going in the middle of outer space. But that's not true, folks. Right now, my men are in their escape pods, and they need to land safely. We need NASA to meet them and make sure they land safely. They're traveling at sub-light speed, which I think is like 2/3 or 3/4 of the speed of light, and it's really slow. They're out there like on the edge of the Milky Way, and they're coming in slowly. Okay? How far out did they go? According to Terrance, they made it out about halfway between Earth and the third heaven. So I didn't know Church of Gail could go that far out, and they said they didn't know that either, but they were so desperate to get away from the Jesuit warship that they went way, way out there. And they're coming back now. They're all coming back in escape pods. So you guys, you need to go find them. Get NASA on this. You need to find them and help them to land safely, okay? And they're going to need doctors and everything when they come in because they've all been seriously injured. A lot of them were knocked unconscious. As far as we know, the only one who died was Jim Carrey. But Brent says he punctured both of his lungs and he has 2 black eyes, and most of his injuries came from slipping in the hallways that were doused with Nukaki. He's very lucky to be alive. Vladimir escaped mostly unharmed. He's covered in 3rd-degree burns over 90% of his body. That's bad, man. It probably happened because he was the last one to go into this escape pod. Maybe he got a little bit of the explosion. I don't know how it happened. I said, 3rd-degree burns. That's a lot. I said, Terrance. He said they've got amazing technology, so they think he's going to be okay. But these guys are going to need doctors when they come in. Fox News, Gabriellechana News Channel, you need to report on this. You need to wake up the presidents around the world. That movie that the Jesuits been dropping off at that wasn't Jesus dropping those movies off. That was the Jesuits. Apparently, Jesus said he doesn't like to intervene too much because that makes Satan show up. And Jesus doesn't like it when Satan shows up. So apparently there's been no trial where Satan has showed up. That was all bunk. Okay? And Brent Spiner has not been communicating with me at all brain to brain. He hasn't been able to because the Nukakis messed it all up. So Vladimir Putin contracted herpes of the eye, which has, Brent says that could lead to herpes of the brain if it isn't treated swiftly. So get the doctors to treat Vladimir Putin. That is correct, though, about LeVar Burton. I did mention that LeVar Burton was making posts for Brent at his Twitter channel. Apparently, Brent did leave instructions to LeVar to do that. So that is correct. However, I read at Fox News that Vladimir Putin made some sort of an appearance with some guy today, and Terrance said that isn't true. Maybe they used his clone or whatever. Fox News apparently lied about that. Though I didn't see any pictures. Okay. All right. So I'm going to post this now. NASA, you need to go out there and meet these guys. There was no trial in the middle of outer space. Those movies that were dropped off are not correct. Okay. So let's get on this and help these. We need doctors and we need NASA to help these guys to land safely.